future alma mater. He's in the Baltimore. So just came back to Facebook.
Very nice. Very nice. Oh, nice. Bring them by. Okay. Let's see. Okay. Okay, so last week on Friday, we had done this new Sif Dalid, and we had learned that if I borrow a book, as long as I keep it in my possession, in my home, I'm allowed to offer someone else to read it, as long as it remains on my property. Because that's the assumption, is that the owner of the book knows that anything that I keep on my property will be used potentially by other people. And so the example was a book, but it doesn't have to be a book of Torah. But that's, of course, provided that the owner has not said, I only want you to use it, don't let anyone else touch it. Okay? Okay. And and we had also seen that that's only if you're reading the book. We were talking specifically about a book in this case. You can only read it as one person. But if two people try to read a book together, sometimes that could create excessive wear and tear on a book. And whenever you borrow a book, you should never let two people read it at the same time. Okay? And so then, let's see. Don't think we have any likutim over here. Let me see. Let me see if there's a, maybe there is. Yes, there is some likutim. Hashoel Sefer on the previous page. If you borrow a book, Afal Gav de Kaimelon Jeshoel Chayiv Ba'onsin, he says, even though we paskin that a borrower is liable for all mishaps, right? But if you borrow a book from a friend and something happens to it and it gets damaged, there's a machlokas in the poskim whether you're liable. He says, here's an argument to argue counter that. He says, the reason, why do we say that a shoel is always liable for all manner of mishap? It's because he's getting pure benefit. He's not giving anything for it. There's no cost. But when I lend you a book, you are, and this is referring specifically to a Torah book, I get benefit also by being able to, I get the benefit, I get the zuchus of, I've done a mitzvah by lending you the book. And even though mitzvah slav lehano snitnu, but we say, what would a person be willing to pay in order to do a mitzvah with their possessions? In other words, Jews are generally happy to do mitzvahs. And if there are people who are very gratified when they're able to use their property for a mitzvah. So maybe there is some benefit to you, is how the argument goes. V'yesh potrim od mitam acher. There's another reason to say that the benefit is not exclusively that of the shoel. He says, "Dekavin dekaimelan de mitzvah slav lehanos nitnu, v'im kain shoel sefer lo havinehna." But the argument is like this. I just mentioned mitzvahs lav lehanos nitnu. Mitzvahs were not given to benefit from. So if I'm borrowing a Torah book from you, I borrow your chumash I'm not really benefiting because I'm doing a mitzvah with your book, and mitzvahs are not for personal benefit. So even though I do get personal benefit because I love learning Chumash, and it gives me the opportunity to review the Sedra and go over it with Rashi, and it's something that I love to do. But mitzvahs are not for personal benefit. Based on that argument, I'm really not getting full benefit from your Chumash. But others disagree, and others say that no, you have to hold a person who borrows a sefer liable. He says the argument to make the shoel liable is to counter the first argument that the lender is getting personal benefit from using his property for a mitzvah. He says that personal benefit is given to the lender at the moment when he gives me the book. Let's see. The Harikishanasa Shoel, the Hainu b'Mashichas HaChayfetz Liyadu Kfar Nasa HaMitzvah. V'nischayev Shuv HaMashal b'Pruta de Rav Yosef. I'm not sure what he means by this line. V'nischayev Shuv HaMashal b'Pruta de Rav Yosef. I think what it means is that once that mitzvah was already done, and he's gotten his benefit, now that the shoel has it in his possession, and he's already given the benefit to the mashal, to the lender, but now during this new period when he's actually using the chumash, the lender is not benefiting. That's one argument. V'gam mitam hasheni de mitzvah slav lehanos nitnu ein lo patro, de havinehne de Talmud Torah lehanos nit, de havinehne, the Talmud Torah lehanos nite. And he says, and the argument that mitzvahs lav lehanos nitnu is, that maybe the borrower is not getting real solid benefit. He says, no, that's not true. Studying Torah does give a person benefit. Maybe doing a mitzvah, it's not the mitzvah of Talmud Torah that gives me benefit. It's the geschmack, as we say. It's the geschmack of the information that gives me benefit. That's why we don't learn Torah. That's a very good point, Paul. That's why we don't learn Torah on Tisha B'Av. And furthermore, what's that? One mitzvah leads to another mitzvah. So the way you're arguing that the lender is getting more benefit?
Well, not only that, but if you transform him, all of a sudden he's doing 100, lending 100.
Yeah, that's true. Although we're using where we want to counter that argument. We want to say why the shoel is going to be chayev. In other words, your argument is to exempt the shoel from onsin because the lender is getting benefit also. But so that's a good argument on the other side. But the argument on this side, why the borrower should always be liable, is because he is getting exclusive benefit. He's getting tremendous benefit from it. And the final thing that he says, quoting the Nesivos, is that when I borrow a book, I can also make money off of your book because I can tutor people by teaching them Torah. I can give a shir, right? So I'm clearly getting benefit from the sefer. Okay, so it would seem to me fairly obvious that when you borrow a sefer, you are a shoel. You do become liable for onsin, even though you have this argument, but it seems to me not to be a very strong argument. Okay, next, shoel sefer. Let's take a look at the Likutim. Lilmod ba, the novel of an iskalkal yedei halimud, yesh omrim depater mishum dahavi kemeisa machmas malacha. Now, what if I borrow a book for an extended period of time, and I've been using your, I've asked to borrow a particular sefer that takes a year or two to learn from. Okay, let's say I wanted to borrow your Mesilas Yesharim. I don't have my own Mesilas Yesharim, and I'm going to be studying it with a chavrusa. May I use your Mesilas Yesharim? And especially because it's got your notes in it, and you've gone through it already. So the guy says, sure. And he lends me his Mesilas Yesharim, and I'm learning it with my chavrusa, and I'm so inspired. And it's taking us a year and a second year, and I've got my tears are on it because I've gotten so into this Mesilas Yesharim, right? And over the course of time, some of the pages have gotten frayed, and the spine maybe has cracked a couple of times. And by the time I'm ready to return it to you, this is a well-used Mesilas Yesharim. So am I liable for the wear and tear or not? So there is an argument to say that I'm not liable for wear and tear, just like I'm not liable for normal wear and tear on an animal that I borrow from you. So we know that I'm chayiv in onsen. If lightning strikes the animal, or if I use the animal in a way that it was not normally used to working, so then I'm going to be liable. But what if I use the animal for plowing and it's a plow animal, and I've been using it now for a month, and just based on its regular wear and tear, the animal becomes older over the course of the year, and it starts not to be able to schlep as much as it used to. That I'm not liable for, because that's normal. That's called mesa machmas malach. The animal dies or becomes worn out in the normal course of wear and tear work, so that you're not liable for, right? It's the same thing is true for an employee. An employee can't claim workers' comp, I guess, from a halachic standpoint, if just the normal wear and tear on his body from normal work that's not excessive just wears him down. It just happens. Anyway, but the point is, that would be the reason to say that even though I've given you back a very worn sefer with a broken spine in a couple of places, and some of the pages are frayed, that doesn't mean that you can hold me liable.
The question would be, the intensity of learning different to you, the normal, the tears, that beyond someone would normally learn.
How can you not learn? How can you not cry when you learn from Mesilas Yesharim? Yeah, I'm just kidding. Right. Yeah, I was giving a more dramatic example. No, but I'm just saying if normal wear and if a person reading a book over the course of 2 years, there's an expected amount of wear and tear. Okay. Sha'al mitria mechavero. I will tell you this. I have lent books out to people. When there's a what's it called, the dust cover, the paper cover that. When I borrow a book from other people, and it has a dust cover, I would take off the dust cover if I'm going to be using it for an extended period of time, because you know that a paper cover is going to get damaged, right? So maybe you do have a taina. Like, why didn't you just? I mean, if you're going to be learning this for an extended period, why didn't you take off the dust cover? Okay. Anyway. Shal mitria mechavero v'ishtamish imo bizman shahiruach sheina mitzuya v'nishbar machmas chozek haruach chayav l'shalem. We learned this halacha before. If you borrow an umbrella from a friend and you use it at a time when there's a gusty wind and the umbrella breaks, you have to pay for that. V'lo shayich kan lepotro mishum mesim machmas malacha. And you can't say, well, it was normal wear and tear. No, it wasn't. You weren't supposed to open the umbrella when there are hurricane gale force winds. Okay, so not even hurricane, but just a very windy day. Okay, so let's go on to the next halacha. Bamed dvarim amurim kishahashoel nosin rishus lazel ilmodbo. He says, when do we say that if I borrow a book, I can lend it to my friend also to read while it's still in my home? He says that's when Reuven gives permission to Shimon to read the book. Reuven borrowed the book from Yankel, and he's giving his friend Shimon permission to read it while he's in his home. Kikol meshach yimei sheila, so hasefer kano lilmod bo, urashai litain zuchuso la'acher. Because the entire period when Ruvain is the borrower of the book, he has the right to let other people learn from that book also, to read that book as well. Aval asur leilech lebeis chaver likro sham misifro, afilu be'akrai. Where are we? Oh, afilu be'akrai shalom midaito. But what you're not allowed to do is go over to your friend's house and start reading his books without his knowledge. Bain shehu shalo, bain shehu shal biyado. And that it doesn't make a difference here, which is surprising. Like, we're basically saying you don't have a right to go into your friend's house, even though you may have permission to gain access to his house, but you don't have automatic permission to read his books if he doesn't give you permission. And it makes no difference whether those books are owned by him or whether he's borrowed them from others. Ve'ein sarach lomer lihishtamish b'sha'ar chafatzav, ele in kein yadu lo b'veirur shelo yakpid alav ba'al hachefetz, or to use any of his other possessions that you find in his house. You may have permission to be in his house, but that doesn't give you automatic permission to use his stuff, unless you know for sure that he doesn't mind if you use this object. O shehu davar she'ein kol b'nei she'ein derech kol b'nei adam lahakpid alav klal, or whether it's something that it's not normal for people to mind if you use that object. It could be back in the day, books were in the category of things that you needed to get permission. Today, not so much. Today, if a person puts books prominently on a bookshelf in their living room, so then it's assumed that they want people to utilize the books. But I could certainly hear that if a person has a private study and he's got under in a cabinet that has glass doors, he's got first editions of rare books, antiquarian books, then I could understand that he doesn't want people. You can't just go ahead and take those books and start looking at them without his permission. All right, but if there are things in his house that that generally people in today's society wouldn't mind if you just went ahead and used that item, to use his bathroom, right? People are not makbid for people to use my bathroom, and especially if I want to use his deodorizer spray after I finish with the bathroom. You don't have to ask permission to use that, right? Because in using certain items where people generally don't mind, he says you don't have to think that, what if I damage it? No. Right, so that is not so it's perfectly fine even without his knowledge. But if it's something that some people mind and some people don't mind, and there's no way for you to properly ascertain what his preferences are, he says, even though most people don't mind, because it's very unlikely that it's going to be damaged through use, he says, we don't, in this case, go according to the majority. We say it's only if no one in their right mind is going to care whether I use their bathroom or not, right? Or if there's an indication that this bathroom is meant for guests, okay? But what if there's a situation where it's a little bit harder to eyeball it and to say, he might mind, he might not mind, right? Let's say if he's got his own man cave, right? And he's got his stuff there. What if it's his computer, right? What if it's another electronic device? What if it's his big screen TV? and he's got a chair that you can tell is his own chair. Yeah, I would say most people couldn't care less if you sit down and watch TV, but maybe this guy is particular about who's going to sit in his chair. He's got everything arranged just so. He's got it pre-programmed, right? He says, "Va'afilu im barilo shelo yikalkel klal asur." And even if you know for sure that you won't do anything to mess it up, you're still not allowed to assume that he won't mind. Kibal hachefetz choshesh al kol panim shema yikalkel. Because for all I know, the owner may not want people to use it out of his own neurotic concern that it'll get damaged. And if the owner knew that I was using it, maybe he wouldn't be so happy. And then it would turn out that I'm borrowing something without the consent of the owner. And what do you call that person? Is a gazlan. Who gazlan? And that's a thief. Even though you may not damage it at all. Okay. Guy's got a record collection, got some old LPs, and he's got a record player. Oh man, some of that old music on the LPs. What a Yetzer Hara I would have if I came into someone's house and he's got like some old jazz or some old 60s music on those big old LPs. Most people probably wouldn't mind if I played one of their records, but it could be that he doesn't want people playing those records because maybe he's just keeping them as a collection. Who knows? If you're not 100% sure, then you can't make assumptions, is basically what this halacha is saying. When it comes to borrowing someone else's items, even in their own home.
Sometimes what happens, like using your example there, let's say an audio file, you're very concerned the way you're playing that. Say, I remember the old days, putting the album on, cleaning the album, and being very careful about that. And how it's played, so people don't have that sensitivity of care on
Precisely. Yeah. And there's no worse feeling than coming back to your house and a guy's using something that you wish he didn't use, and you got to just grimace, and you don't want to say anything to embarrass him. Oh, I see you found my old record collection. Oh, I hope you're enjoying it. Sure. Let me just wipe down that record, and then we'll play another song. Okay. So anyway, okay. So we've got some stuff here. Okay. All right. Wow, there's a lot of material here. Okay, so let's take a look at we'll start with the Imrei Yaakov. So he said, when is this true? When the borrower gives you permission. Borrower can give someone else permission just as if it's his own property, as long as it stays on his property and he knows that the owner doesn't mind. But to go onto someone's property without their knowledge, even just to read their book, he says, Likros sham misifro afilu ba'akrai. He says to read their book even in a happenstance way. In other words, even in a very casual way. Shemahu makpid pen yikalkalenu. Afal bi shabori lo shelo yikalkalenu. And the reason why you can't do this, to just pull off a book off your friend's shelf without his consent, is that because maybe he's worried that it's going to be damaged. Even though you'll be very careful with it. I'll handle it very carefully. Shekol shoel shalomi das ba'olam hu gazlan af she'inu mafsid klal. Because anytime you borrow something without the knowledge of the owner, you're a gazlan, even though you're not damaging it at all. I know, for example, I have a very old comic book collection, and I know how to handle comic books because I've seen professionals handle them. And I know what can damage a comic, and I know, and if you let someone who doesn't know anything about old comics read, they don't know how to take it out of the bag, they don't know how to put it back in the bag, and they can cause serious financial damage to something that's a very old comic, even though it may look like it's not worth anything, right? But anyway, okay, misifro, dafka bisfarim hadin kain mishum deshchiach shikru v'yitkalkalu. He says the reason why books are chosen as an example as something that you can't take liberties with is because it is very common for books to tear and to get damaged through casual reading even. Ubala svarim choshe shema yikra bahem harbe ad sheyikru mirov mishmusham. And it could very well be that an owner doesn't want these books to get torn or damaged because of regular use. And that's the reason why I can't make an assumption, that he may end up, that the owner won't mind. But what you are allowed to do is you can put on your friend's tallis without his knowledge. Let's say you find a tallis in the shul, and your friend is away, and you need to borrow a tallis. You're allowed to borrow your friend's tallis and assume that he won't mind, because there's very little wear and tear on a tallis. What do you mean? Oh, because of COVID, right? Because of germs. I see what you're saying. Yes, I would agree. I think that's over also. Would you say? Or you don't think so? Yeah.
That's where they ask if people wear masks.
Right. That's true. That's a very valid point. But under normal circumstances, you're allowed to borrow your friend's tallis and you're allowed to borrow his tefillin, even without his knowledge. Like we've learned before, when you find a pair of tefillin in shul, you're allowed to put it on. You don't have to wait to ask permission from the owner. The reason is because there's very little wear and tear. It's a very temporary borrowing. You borrow it for a half an hour, whatever it is. And there's very little wear and tear. So amrinon, so therefore in that kind of situation, we say, people generally are happy for a mitzvah to be done with their property, especially when it doesn't cost them anything, right? It's no skin off of my nose if you go ahead and use my tefillin because I'm not using them. You're just borrowing them for a half an hour. There's no significant wear and tear, and why not? I'm happy that someone else can do a mitzvah with my property. But that's only in a very once in a while kind of thing, in a very what's the word I'm looking for? I've lost my words. In a very arbitrary, non-fixed way. But to borrow it on a regular, habitual basis, to borrow my friend's tefillin, like he's gone to Florida for 6 months, and I know he's not going to need his tefillin, and I decide that I like my friend's tefillin more than mine, or mine are broken, my tefillin broke, they became puzzle, and I figure, why should I buy a new pair of tefillin now? I'll just use my friend's pair. He's not here for 6 months, and what he won't mind. So that you're not allowed to do, because there is going to be wear and tear over the course of an extended period of time. And furthermore, when we say you're allowed to borrow them on a casual basis, that's only to when you leave them in the place where they were left. But let's say my friend has his tefillin in shul. My friend's in Florida for 6 months. He left his tefillin in shul, and now I want to go to Niagara for the weekend. Why not take my friend's tefillin? He's not going to know about it. What does he care? So that you're not allowed to do. You can't take them out of the place where they're being stored. The efshir shemak b'dalava havi gezel, because there you do have to be concerned. It's one thing for you to use my tefillin where I left them, but now for you to take them out where I left them and take them because where you want to go, no, that you can't do. Yeah, even if it's put in a cubby, as long as it's not locked.
How would you ever have access to their film to show? All films can be put away somewhere.
Yeah, you can get it from the, you put it back in.
Yeah, you take it out of the cubby, you put it back in the cubby when you're done. Essentially, what we're saying is that people generally don't mind for their possessions to be used for a mitzvah. Yeah. No, I wasn't saying that. I was saying that if you want to take it off the premises of the shul, that you're not allowed to do. You can't take it off the premises. Okay, we'll hold it here for today. We'll continue Mitzvah Shem tomorrow.